Some wounds cut so deep that silence becomes complicity. I'm 73 years old, and I've learned that respect isn't something you can buy with decades of love and sacrifice. It's something people either choose to give you, or they don't. What happened at my grandson's graduation taught me that sometimes the people closest to you can be the cruelest strangers of all. By the end of this story, you'll understand why I did what I did, and why some truths are worth the chaos they create. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning of Tyler's graduation from Northwestern University started like any other Saturday in May. I woke up at 5:30, as I had every day for the past 40 years, even though retirement meant I no longer needed to. Old habits die hard, especially when you've spent most of your life working double shifts at the textile factory to make ends meet. My small apartment in Rockford, Illinois was quiet, except for the gentle hum of the coffee maker I'd set the night before. I stood at my kitchen window, watching the sun creep over the parking lot of my modest senior living complex, and felt that familiar flutter of pride mixed with anticipation. Today was the day I'd been looking forward to for 4 long years. Tyler William Chen-Rodriguez was graduating with honors from one of the most prestigious universities in the country, and I had played no small part in making that dream possible. Tyler wasn't just my grandson. He was my purpose. After my daughter, Maria died in a car accident when he was only 8 years old, and his father Miguel disappeared into a bottle and never came back out, Tyler came to live with me. We were quite the pair, a 70-year-old widow and a grieving little boy, but somehow we made it work. I sold my house and moved us into a tiny 2-bedroom apartment so I could afford to put him in good schools. I worked overtime whenever it was offered, picked up weekend shifts, and learned to stretch every dollar until it screamed. I taught him to tie his shoes, helped him with his homework, attended every parent-teacher conference, every science fair, every basketball game where he mostly sat on the bench but cheered louder than anyone when his teammates scored. When he got accepted to Northwestern with a partial scholarship, I liquidated my retirement savings to cover the rest. It was worth every penny to see the joy on his face, the way his shoulders straightened with pride when he told his friends where he was going to college. The drive to Evanston took me nearly 2 hours, but I didn't mind. I'd made this trip dozens of times over the past 4 years, bringing Tyler care packages, taking him out for dinner when his meal plan ran low, attending family weekends even, though I was often the oldest person there by decades. The other parents would smile politely when we were introduced, but I could see the questions in their eyes. Where were Tyler's real parents? Why was this elderly woman at college events? Meant for families in their 40s and 50s? I never minded the stares or the whispered conversations. Tyler was my family, my only family, and I was proud to be there for him. He used to introduce me with such warmth, his arm around my shoulders, telling anyone who would listen about how his grandmother had raised him, how she was the strongest person he knew, how he wouldn't be where he was without her. Those introductions made every sacrifice worthwhile. But something had shifted during his senior year. Tyler's calls became less frequent, his visits home rarer. When I asked about his girlfriend, Vanessa, whom he'd mentioned in passing a few times, he was evasive. He'd met her family, he said, but the timing never seemed right for me to meet them. They were busy people, he explained. Important people. Vanessa's father was some kind of executive, her mother a prominent socialite. They lived in a world I wouldn't understand. I told myself it was natural for him to want to fit in with his new life, his new girlfriend's family. College was about expanding horizons, meeting different kinds of people. I was proud that he was confident enough to navigate social circles I'd never been part of. But a small part of me, a part I tried to ignore, wondered if he was embarrassed by me. By my thrift store clothes and my working-class accent, by the way I pronounced certain words or didn't understand references to things I'd never had the money to experience. The graduation ceremony was being held at Ryan Field, Northwestern's football stadium. I'd never been inside before, and the sheer size of it took my breath away. Thousands of people were streaming in, families dressed in their finest clothes, carrying flowers and balloons, professional cameras slung around necks. Everyone looked so polished, so put together. I glanced down at my best dress, a navy blue, number I'd bought at Walmart for my neighbor's funeral 3 years ago, and suddenly felt every one of my 73 years. I followed the crowd toward the entrance, clutching my small purse and the single red rose I'd bought for Tyler at the grocery store. It wasn't much, but it was what I could afford, and I'd chosen it carefully, making sure it was the most perfect, bloom in the bunch. As I walked, I heard fragments of conversation around me, talk of summer houses and European vacations, of graduate school and job offers at prestigious firms. These people lived in a different universe than I did, one where money wasn't something you worried about every month. At the will call table, I gave my name to a young volunteer who looked barely old enough to be in college herself. She scrolled through her computer screen with a frown, then checked a physical list, then went back to the computer. "Eleanor Vasquez?" she asked, pronouncing my name correctly, which surprised me. Most people stumbled over the Spanish pronunciation. "That's right," I confirmed, spelling it out just to be sure. She handed me a ticket and a program. "You're in section 240, row ZZ, seat 15. I thanked her and made my way into the stadium, following the signs to my section. The numbers kept getting higher as I climbed, and I realized I was being directed toward the very top of the stadium. My knees, which had been giving me trouble for years, protested with each step, but I pushed through the discomfort. Tyler was graduating summa cum laude with a degree in economics. Nothing was going to keep me from being there to see it. Section 240 turned out to be in the uppermost level of the stadium, so high up that the football field looked like a postage stamp below. Row ZZ was the very last row, pressed against the back wall. My seat was wedged between a concrete pillar and a maintenance door. From where I sat, I could barely make out the stage where the ceremony would take place, let alone see individual graduates. I settled into my seat, trying to make the best of it. At least I was here. At least I would be able to say I was present for this milestone moment in Tyler's life. I opened the program and found his name listed among the economics graduates. Tyler William Chen-Rodriguez, summa cum laude. My heart swelled with pride. Whatever else happened, whatever distance had grown between us, I had helped make this possible. As more people filled in around me, I noticed that this section seemed to be filled with older relatives, distant family members, and what appeared to be overflow seating for people who hadn't received priority tickets. The energy was different up here, more subdued, less festive than what I could see in the sections closer to the field. About 20 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, I decided to stretch my legs and see if I could get a better view from somewhere else in the stadium. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Maybe there was a spot where I could stand and actually see Tyler when he walked across the stage. I made my way down the stairs, my knee joints grateful for the downward movement, and found myself on one of the concourses that ringed the stadium. From here, I had a better view of the field-level seating, and what I saw made my stomach drop. About 15 rows from the front, in what were clearly some of the best seats in the house, I spotted a familiar figure. Tyler was standing up, adjusting his graduation cap, talking animatedly to a group of well-dressed people around him. Even from this distance, I could see his bright smile, the same one that had greeted me every morning when he was a little boy. But it wasn't Tyler who made my blood run cold. It was the woman sitting next to him, a blonde woman in an elegant cream-colored suit who was adjusting a boutonniere on his graduation gown with motherly care. She was about my daughter's age, maybe a few years older, with the kind of polished appearance that spoke of regular salon visits and expensive skincare. A man who was clearly her husband sat beside her, equally well-dressed, holding what looked like a professional camera with a telephoto lens. As I watched, A younger woman approached Tyler, kissing him on the cheek. This had to be Vanessa, the girlfriend I'd heard so much about but never met. She was beautiful in the way that money, made possible, with perfect teeth and highlighted hair and a dress that probably cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. She gestured to the woman in the cream suit, and Tyler nodded, introducing them with obvious affection. The family tableau was complete. Tyler surrounded by what appeared to be his adoptive family, people who looked like they belonged in this world of higher education and social status. People who could afford front-row seats to their loved one's graduation. People who looked like the kind of family a successful college graduate should have. I stood there on the concourse, invisible, among the crowd, watching the boy I had raised being claimed by another family. The woman in the cream suit laughed at something Tyler said, reaching out to straighten his collar with the casual intimacy of someone who had the right to touch him, to mother him. I had seen that gesture 1,000 times in my own mirror, the automatic motherly adjustment that said you belong to each other. But here was someone else making that gesture, someone else being introduced as family, someone else occupying the place of honor that should have been mine. I thought about all the graduation ceremonies I'd attended over the years, from kindergarten through high school, sitting in the front row because I was the only family Tyler had. The pride I'd felt when teachers commented on what a wonderful job I was doing raising him. The sacrifices that had led to this moment, the years of choosing between heating bills and Christmas presents, between my medications and his school supplies. A family near me was taking pictures, and their flash momentarily illuminated the field-level seating. In that brief moment of clarity, I saw Tyler's face more clearly than I had from my assigned seat. He looked happy, genuinely happy, in a way I hadn't seen in months. He looked like he belonged with these people, like this was where he was meant to be. I understood then what had happened. Somewhere during his 4 years at this prestigious university, Tyler had decided that his real family wasn't good enough for this moment. The grandmother who had raised him, the woman who had worked herself to the bone to give him opportunities she'd never had, wasn't the kind of family member you wanted visible at your triumph. I was an embarrassment, a reminder of where he'd come from instead of a celebration of where he was going. The tears that came surprised me with their intensity. I hadn't cried when Maria died, hadn't cried when Miguel abandoned us, hadn't cried through any of the hardships of the past 15 years. But standing there, watching my grandson pretend I didn't exist while another woman played the role I had earned, I felt something break inside me that I wasn't sure could ever be repaired. I made my way back to my seat in section 240, row ZZ, seat 15. The ceremony had begun, and a dean was giving some kind of opening remarks that I couldn't hear clearly from my position behind the concrete pillar. I sat there, clutching my single red rose and tried to process what I was feeling. It was more than hurt, more than disappointment. It was a fundamental reordering of how I understood my place in Tyler's life. When Tyler's name was called, I stood up along with everyone else, in my section, straining to catch a glimpse of him walking across the stage. He was too far away for me to see clearly, but I could make out a figure in a cap and gown receiving a diploma, shaking hands with university officials, posing for photos. The people in the front section erupted in cheers, and I could see camera flashes going off like fireworks. Vanessa's family was documenting every second of this moment, creating the kind of graduation memory album that Tyler would treasure for the rest of his life. I clapped until my hands hurt, even though Tyler couldn't possibly hear me over the noise of the crowd, even though he had no idea where I was sitting, even though, for all intents and purposes, I might as well not have been there at all. After the ceremony ended, families began flooding onto the field to take pictures with their graduates. I watched. The exodus from my high perch, knowing that I could fight my way down there if I wanted to. I could force my way through the crowd, find Tyler, and insert myself into his celebration. I could demand the recognition I deserved, remind him of everything I had done to make this day possible. but something held me back. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the devastating realization that Tyler had made his choice about where I fit in his new life. Either way, I remained in my seat as the stadium slowly emptied around me, watching as the maintenance crew began cleaning up the debris of celebration. I was almost alone in the stadium when my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Tyler, sent to what I now realized was a group text that included several people I didn't recognize. "Thanks everyone for coming today. Graduation party at the Kendall's house at 7 p.m. Can't wait to celebrate with family." The Kendalls. That must be Vanessa's family, the people who had occupied the front row seats, the people who Tyler was now celebrating with as family. I wasn't included in the group text about Tyler's own graduation party. I wasn't considered family enough to receive an invitation to celebrate the achievement I had made possible. I sat there in the empty stadium, looking at that text message, and felt the last piece of the illusion I'd been maintaining finally crumble. Tyler didn't see me as his family anymore. I was a remnant from his past, someone to be managed and minimized, not celebrated. The boy I had raised, the young man I had sacrificed everything for, was ashamed of me. The drive home to Rockford was the longest 2 hours of my life. I kept the radio off, driving in silence as I tried to make sense of what had happened. How had I missed the signs that Tyler was pulling away? When had I stopped being his proud grandmother and become his embarrassing secret? Back in my apartment, I made myself a cup of tea and sat at my small kitchen table, still wearing my navy blue dress, still holding the single red rose I'd never had the chance to give him. The apartment felt smaller than usual, filled with reminders of the 15 years I'd spent raising Tyler. His school pictures lined the refrigerator, his high school diploma hung on the wall, his childhood toys were still packed away in my bedroom closet because I'd never had the heart to throw them away. I thought about calling him, demanding an explanation for why I'd been hidden away in the upper deck while strangers took my place in the front row. But what would be the point? Tyler was 22 years old, a college graduate about to start his career. He was old enough to make his own choices about who he wanted in his life and how he wanted to present himself to the world. And clearly, he had chosen to present himself as someone who came from a different kind of family than the one that had actually raised him. The next few days passed in a blur of routine activities that felt strange and hollow. I went to my weekly grocery shopping, attended my book club at the senior center, watched my evening television programs. But everything felt different now, like I was going through the motions of a life that no longer made sense. The purpose that had driven me for 15 years, the satisfaction I'd found in Tyler's achievements, the pride I'd taken in his success, all of it felt tainted by the knowledge that he was ashamed of me. A week after graduation, Tyler finally called. I almost didn't answer, but old habits die hard, and I'd never been able to ignore a call from him, no matter how hurt I was. "Grandma Eleanor!" His voice was bright and cheerful, as if nothing had happened. "How are you doing? Sorry. I haven't called. It's been crazy with graduation and everything." "Hello, Tyler," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "How was your graduation?" "Oh, it was incredible. The ceremony was beautiful, and Northwestern really knows how to do things right. Did you enjoy it? I know the stadium is huge. It must have been quite a sight." I paused, unsure how to respond. Was he really going to pretend that nothing had happened? That I hadn't been relegated to the worst seats in the house while his girlfriend's family was treated as his real family? "It was certainly an experience," I said finally. "Great. I'm so glad you could be there. Listen, I wanted to thank you again for everything you've done to help me get through college. I know it wasn't easy, and I really appreciate all the sacrifices you made." The gratitude felt hollow, rehearsed, like something he'd practiced saying. I wondered if Vanessa or her parents had coached him on how to handle his elderly benefactor with appropriate politeness. "You're welcome," I said. "So, I have some exciting news. Vanessa and I are talking about moving in together. And her father has offered me a position at his investment firm. It's an incredible opportunity, way better than anything I could have gotten on my own. I'll be starting at a salary that's more than you used to make in a year, if you can believe that. I could believe it. I could also believe that Tyler was already mentally calculating how much distance this new salary would buy him from his old life, from the grandmother who had worked in a factory to pay for his education. That sounds wonderful, I managed. It really is. And the best part is, Vanessa's family has basically adopted me. You know how her parents are both successful professionals, and they have this amazing house in Lake Forest, and they're already talking about me like I'm their son. It's incredible to finally feel like I belong somewhere, you know? Finally feel like he belonged somewhere. As if the 15 years he'd spent in my care, the family we'd built together after losing everyone else, hadn't been belonging. As if I had been a temporary caretaker rather than the person who had chosen to love him when everyone else had given up. I see, I said quietly. Anyway, I should probably get going. Vanessa and I are having dinner with her parents tonight, and I want to make a good impression. But I'll call you soon, okay? Maybe we can have lunch sometime when I'm back in the area. Lunch sometime when he was back in the area. As if Rockford, the place he'd called home for most of his life, was now just a place he might visit occasionally. A minor stop on the way to more important destinations. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the phone. Tyler had gotten everything he'd wanted. The education, the job, the girlfriend, the new family that could give him the kind of life I'd never been able to provide. He was happy, successful, and moving forward into a future that didn't include me in any meaningful way. I should have been proud. I should have been satisfied that all my sacrifices had paid off, that Tyler was going to have opportunities I could never have dreamed of. Instead, I felt empty, like I'd spent 15 years pouring myself into a vessel that had turned out to have a hole in the bottom. That night, I dreamed about Maria, my daughter, Tyler's mother. In the dream, she was young again, maybe 25, holding a toddler Tyler on her hip while we sat in my old kitchen. She was laughing at something Tyler had said, and he was giggling in that infectious way that small children do. "He's going to do great things," Dream Maria said to me. "But remember, Mama, great things don't always look like what we expect them to." When I woke up, I couldn't shake the feeling that Maria had been trying to tell me something. Maybe Tyler's success was supposed to look exactly like this. Maybe the point of raising him hadn't been to ensure my own place in his life, but to prepare him to move beyond the limitations of the world he'd been born into. Maybe love sometimes meant accepting that the person you'd raised was going to outgrow you. But understanding something intellectually and feeling peace about it emotionally were two very different things. And as I went about my daily routine, in the weeks following Tyler's graduation, I found myself struggling with a loneliness that felt deeper and more permanent than anything I'd experienced since Maria's death. The apartment that had felt cozy when it housed two people now felt cavernous. The routines that had revolved around Tyler's needs and schedule now felt pointless. Even my weekly grocery shopping felt different when I only needed to buy food. For one person, when I didn't need to stock up on the snacks and easy meals that had kept Tyler fed during his visits home from college. I tried to fill the empty space with other activities. I volunteered more hours at the food bank, joined a new exercise class at the senior center, even considered adopting a cat for companionship. But nothing seemed to address the fundamental hollowness I felt, the sense that the central purpose of my life had been completed and I was no longer needed. 3 weeks after graduation, I received an unexpected visitor. I was washing dishes after lunch when there was a knock at my door. Through the peephole, I could see a young woman I didn't recognize, well-dressed and holding what looked like a bouquet of flowers. When I opened the door, she introduced herself as Jessica, one of Tyler's classmates from Northwestern. She was pretty in a wholesome way, with kind eyes and a genuine smile that reminded me of how Tyler used to smile before he'd learned to be embarrassed by his background. "Mrs. Vasquez," she said, "I hope you don't mind me stopping by unannounced. Tyler gave me your address a while back when we were working on a group project together, and I've been wanting to meet you ever since." I invited her in, curious about what had brought her to my door. She declined my offer of coffee but accepted a glass of water, settling into my living room with the comfortable ease of someone who was used to talking to people of all ages. "I wanted to thank you," she said without preamble. "Tyler told me about how you raised him after his mother died, how you worked extra shifts to pay for his education, how you sacrificed your retirement savings to help him through Northwestern. What you did was incredible." I was touched by her words, but also confused. "That's very kind of you to say, but I don't understand why you felt the need to come all the way here to tell me that." Jessica looked uncomfortable for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "Can I be honest with you? Tyler and I were close friends for most of college, and I've heard him talk about you many times over the years. The way he used to describe you, the pride he had in everything you'd done for him, it was really beautiful. But something changed this year, especially after he started dating Vanessa." My heart sank. So it hadn't been my imagination. Tyler really had changed, really had started to distance himself from me. "I don't know the details," Jessica continued, "but I know that Tyler didn't invite you to his graduation party, and I know that you were seated separately from him at the ceremony. I also know that he's been telling people that Vanessa's parents are his family now, and I think that's wrong." The kindness in her voice almost brought me to tears. Here was someone who barely knew me, showing me more consideration than my own grandson had. "I appreciate you coming here," I said carefully, "but Tyler is an adult. He gets to choose how he wants to live his life, and who he wants to include in it." "You're right," Jessica agreed, "but that doesn't make his choices right. And it doesn't mean you should just accept being erased from the story of his success." She leaned forward, her expression earnest. "Mrs. Vasquez, Tyler wouldn't be where he is today without you. Everyone who really knows him understands that. Just because he's chosen to minimize your role now doesn't change the reality of what you did for him." After Jessica left, I found myself thinking about her words. She was right that Tyler's current behavior didn't erase the past, didn't diminish what I had accomplished in raising him. But knowing that intellectually didn't make the hurt any less real, didn't make the loneliness any easier to bear. I spent that evening looking through photo albums, tracing the progression of Tyler's life from the scared 8-year-old who had come to live with me to the confident young man who had graduated summa cum laude from Northwestern. The pictures told the story Jessica had referenced, the story of a grandmother who had given everything to help her grandson succeed. But they also told another story, one I hadn't noticed while I was living it. In the early pictures, Tyler and I were always touching, his small hand in mine, his arm around my shoulders, my hand resting protectively on his back. But as the pictures progressed through his teenage years and into college, the physical distance between us grew. In the more recent photos, we stood side by side but separately, like acquaintances posing together rather than family members who belonged to each other. When had that distance started? When had Tyler begun to see me as an obligation, rather than his chosen family? Had it been gradual, so slow that I hadn't noticed? Or had there been specific moments when he'd realized that his future lay in a different direction than his past? I thought about the stories I'd heard from other parents and grandparents over the years, stories about children who grew up and moved away, who built new lives that didn't include the people who had raised them. I'd always felt sorry for those families, confident that Tyler and I had a bond that couldn't be broken by success or social climbing. But maybe I'd been naive. Maybe the very success I'd helped Tyler achieve had inevitably meant that he would outgrow the need for me. Maybe the goal of parenting was supposed to be making yourself obsolete, preparing the child to move beyond you into a bigger, better world. If that was the case, then I had succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. Tyler was living the kind of life I could never have provided for him, moving in social circles I would never be comfortable in, building a future that was limited only by his own ambition and talent. Everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, had led to this moment of his independence and success. So why did success feel so much like failure? Why did Tyler's happiness feel like my own rejection? Why did the achievement of all my parenting goals leave me feeling so completely empty? I didn't have answers to those questions, but I knew that I couldn't continue living in the shadow of Tyler's rejection. I was 73 years old, and if Tyler no longer needed me, then I needed to figure out what the rest of my life was going to look like. I needed to find a purpose that didn't depend on someone else's gratitude or recognition. The next morning, I called the volunteer coordinator at the food bank and asked about increasing my hours. If I was going to be alone, I might as well make myself useful. At least there, my efforts would be appreciated by people who understood what it meant to need help, who wouldn't be embarrassed by my working-class background or my thrift store clothes. As I prepared for this new chapter of my life, I tried to make peace with the way things had ended with Tyler. He was happy, successful, and building the kind of life that would take him far beyond the limitations of his childhood. I had given him the tools he needed to succeed, and he was using them exactly as he should. But deep down, in a place I tried not to examine too closely, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had been lost in Tyler's transformation. The boy who had once been proud to introduce me as his grandmother, who had credited me with his achievements, who had understood the value of sacrifice and hard work, had been replaced by someone who was ashamed of where he'd come from. And while I was proud of Tyler's success, I mourned the loss of the young man who had once seen me as his hero rather than his embarrassment. I spent the next month living in a strange kind of suspended animation, going through the motions of my daily routine while feeling fundamentally disconnected from my own life. The volunteer work at the food bank helped fill the hours, but it couldn't fill the hollow space that Tyler's rejection had carved out inside me. I found myself avoiding the grocery store aisles where I used to buy his favorite snacks, skipping past the television shows we used to watch together, even changing my walking route through the senior complex to avoid passing the playground where we used to sit and talk about his dreams. The other residents at Sunset Manor had noticed my change in mood, though I tried to hide it. Mrs. Chen from 4B kept bringing me extra portions of the dumplings she made for her own family, insisting that I looked too thin. Harold from the first floor, who usually only talked about his late wife and his arthritis, started making a point of stopping by my mailbox at the same time I checked mine, offering commentary about the weather or the latest gossip from the building's social committee. They were being kind, in the way that elderly people who had experienced their own losses recognized grief in others. But their gentle concern only highlighted how completely alone I felt. These people were acquaintances, fellow travelers in the landscape of aging, but they weren't family. They didn't know about the 15 years I'd spent raising Tyler, the pride I'd taken in his achievements, the way his success had given meaning to every sacrifice I'd made. It was Mrs. Chen who finally forced me to confront what I was doing to myself. She knocked on my door on a Tuesday evening in late June, carrying a plate of spring rolls and wearing the determined expression of someone who wasn't going to be easily dismissed. "Eleanor," she said, brushing past me into my living room without waiting for an invitation, "we need to talk." I followed her to my kitchen table where she set down the plate and fixed me with a stern look that reminded me of the elementary school principal I'd dealt with during Tyler's younger years. "You've been moping around here for weeks," she said. Bluntly. "Everyone's noticed. And while we all understand that you're going through something difficult, it's time to stop feeling sorry for yourself and start doing something about it." Her directness caught me off guard. "I don't know what you mean." "Of course you do." Mrs. Chen settled into the chair across from me, her small frame somehow commanding despite her size. "You've been heartbroken since that graduation you went to. Something happened with your grandson, didn't it?" I found myself nodding before I could stop myself. There was something about Mrs. Chen's matter-of-fact approach that made pretending seem pointless. "He's moved on," I said simply. "Found a new family that fits better with his new life." Mrs. Chen made a dismissive sound. "And you're just going to accept that? Let him erase you from his story like you never mattered? What choice do I have? He's an adult. He gets to decide who he wants in his life." "He gets to decide," Mrs. Chen agreed, "but that doesn't mean his decisions are right. And it doesn't mean you have to make it easy for him." She leaned forward, her eyes intense. "My daughter did something similar when she married that lawyer. Suddenly, her mother who cleaned houses for 40 years wasn't good enough for her. New social circle. So I let her ignore me for 2 years, thinking I was being respectful of her choices. What happened? I got tired of being invisible. So I showed up at her country club charity luncheon and reminded everyone there exactly who had worked 3 jobs to put her through law school." Mrs. Chen smiled grimly. "It was uncomfortable for everyone involved, but it worked. My daughter realized that she could either be embarrassed by me or proud of me, but she couldn't just pretend I didn't exist." I stared at her, trying to imagine having that kind of courage. I couldn't do something like that. Why not? What do you have to lose that you haven't already lost? The question hung in the air between us. What did I have to lose? Tyler had already written me out of his success story. His girlfriend's family had already replaced me in his affections. I was already living with the pain of his rejection. What could be worse than the limbo I was currently existing in? "Think about it," Mrs. Chen said, standing up to leave. "But don't think too long. The longer you wait, the easier it becomes for him to pretend you never mattered." After she left, I found myself pacing around my small apartment, Mrs. Chen's words echoing in my mind. She was right that I had nothing left to lose. But more than that, she was right that Tyler's behavior was wrong. I had raised him to be better than this, to understand the value of loyalty and gratitude. The fact that he was choosing to ignore those lessons didn't mean I had to quietly accept his choice. I thought about Jessica's visit, about her recognition that Tyler's success story was incomplete without acknowledging my role in it. I thought about all the other people who had known Tyler throughout his childhood and teenage years, teachers and coaches and neighbors who had watched me raise him, who understood what I had sacrificed to give him opportunities. More importantly, I thought about Maria, my daughter, Tyler's mother. What would she think of the man her son had become? Would she be proud that he had achieved such academic and professional success? Or would she be disappointed that he had forgotten the values she and I had tried to instill in him? That night, I did something I hadn't done since Tyler was a small child. I pulled out a photo album and looked through pictures of Maria, remembering not just her death, but her life. She had been strong-willed and independent, someone who stood up for herself and others. She had also been fiercely loyal to family, the kind of person who would drive across 3 states to help a cousin she barely knew. If Maria could see what was happening now, she would be furious. Not just at Tyler's ingratitude, but at my passivity in accepting it. She would expect me to fight for my place in Tyler's life, to remind him of who he was and where he came from. The next morning, I called Northwestern University's alumni office. I told them I was interested in making a donation in memory of my daughter, who had died young, and wondered if they could help me understand the process. The woman I spoke with was helpful and enthusiastic, explaining that memorial donations were always welcome and that they could be directed toward specific programs or scholarships. "We also like to recognize significant donors at our annual events," she mentioned. "Would you be interested in attending any of our upcoming alumni gatherings?" I asked her to send me information about all of their events, not just the donation process. If Tyler was going to be part of the Northwestern community, then I wanted to understand what that community looked like. The packet arrived a week later, filled with glossy brochures advertising everything from homecoming weekends to continuing education programs to donor recognition dinners. One event in particular caught my attention: the annual Young Alumni Achievement Award ceremony, scheduled for September. According to the brochure, it was a prestigious event that honored recent graduates who had demonstrated exceptional professional success or community leadership. I called the alumni office back and asked about the nomination process for the awards. The woman I spoke with explained that nominations could come from faculty, employers, or community members who could speak to a graduate's achievements. The deadline for nominations was still 6 weeks away. That afternoon, I drove to the Rockford Public Library and spent 3 hours researching Tyler's new employer, Vanessa's father's investment firm. I learned about their client base, their recent deals, their reputation in the Chicago financial community. I also researched Vanessa's family, finding social media profiles that documented their lifestyle, their charitable involvement, their social connections. What I discovered didn't surprise me, but it crystallized my understanding of what Tyler was trying to become. The Kendalls lived in a world of country club memberships and charity galas, of vacation homes and private schools, of networking events where business was conducted over expensive wine and carefully curated small talk. It was a world where your background mattered, where the right family connections could open doors that talent alone couldn't reach. I understood why Tyler wanted to be part of that world. I even understood why he might feel that his past was an impediment to his future in it. But understanding his motivations didn't make his choices right, and it didn't mean I had to quietly disappear to make his social climbing easier. Over the next few weeks, I began developing what Mrs. Chen would later call my campaign. I reached out to Tyler's former teachers, coaches, and mentors, asking them to write letters of recommendation for his Young Alumni Achievement Award nomination. I contacted the local newspaper that had written a feature story about Tyler's academic success when he graduated from high school, asking for copies of their archives. Most importantly, I began documenting my own role in Tyler's success. I gathered financial records showing the money I'd spent on his education, photos from school events I'd attended, copies of college application essays where he'd written about overcoming adversity with his grandmother's support. I collected evidence of the 15 years I'd spent shaping him into the man he'd become. The people I contacted were universally supportive once they understood what I was trying to do. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had been Tyler's high school guidance counselor, was particularly outraged when I explained how Tyler had been treating me. "That boy owes everything to you," she said during a phone call that lasted nearly an hour. I remember when he first started talking about college, how proud he was of the sacrifices you were making for him. I can't believe he's forgotten that. She offered to write not just a letter of recommendation, but also a detailed account of Tyler's background that could be included in any award materials. "People need to know where he came from," she said. "They need to understand what kind of character it took for him to succeed, despite losing his parents so young." Coach Martinez, who had coached Tyler's high school basketball team, had a similar reaction. "Tyler used to talk about you all the time," he told me. "How you worked double shifts to pay for his SAT prep courses, how you drove him to every practice, even though you were exhausted from work. He said you were his hero." He said I was his hero? The words caught in my throat. All the time. He used to say that if he could be half as strong as his grandmother, he'd be able to handle anything life threw at him. These conversations were both heartbreaking and energizing. Heartbreaking because they reminded me of the Tyler I used to know, the young man who had valued my sacrifices and seen strength in my struggles. Energizing because they confirmed that other people remembered that version of Tyler too, and they were as disturbed as I was by his current behavior. By August, I had assembled a comprehensive nomination packet for Tyler's Young Alumni Achievement Award. But more than that, I had developed a plan for making sure that Tyler's success story was told completely and accurately, including the parts he seemed determined to forget. I wasn't planning to ambush him or embarrass him publicly. I was planning to remind him and everyone around him of who he really was and where he had come from. I was planning to reclaim my place in his story, not as an embarrassing footnote, but as the central figure who had made his success possible. The first step was attending Tyler's company's summer networking event, which I had learned about through their website. It was being held at a trendy restaurant in downtown Chicago, and according to the event description, it was designed to help young employees build relationships with clients and community leaders. I had never crashed a networking event before, but I figured there was a first time for everything. I bought a new dress, something more appropriate for the Chicago professional scene than my usual thrift store finds. I practiced what I would say if anyone asked who I was or why I was there. I researched the other companies that would be represented so I could sound informed if I needed to make small talk. The night of the event, I took the train into Chicago, something I hadn't done in years. The restaurant was exactly what I had expected, sleek and modern, filled with young professionals in expensive suits holding wine glasses and business cards. The noise level was overwhelming, a combination of aggressive networking and carefully modulated laughter. I spotted Tyler almost immediately. He was standing near the bar with Vanessa and an older man who had to be her father, based on the family resemblance. Tyler looked confident and comfortable in this environment, laughing at something Mr. Kendall was saying while Vanessa hung on his arm like an accessory. I watched them for several minutes, noting how Tyler's posture had changed since college. He stood differently now, with the kind of casual confidence that came from knowing you belonged in expensive places. His laugh was different too, more controlled, more calculated. Even his accent had shifted slightly, losing some of the working-class inflections that had marked his speech when he lived with me. I was still deciding how to approach him when the decision was made for me. Tyler looked up from his conversation, and his eyes met mine across the crowded room. For a moment, his face went completely blank, as if he couldn't process what he was seeing. Then I saw recognition dawn, followed immediately by panic. He excused himself from his group and made his way over to me, weaving through the crowd with obvious urgency. When he reached me, he grabbed my arm and guided me toward a quieter corner near the restaurant's entrance. "Grandma Eleanor," he said. His voice strained. "What are you doing here?" "Hello, Tyler. You look well." He glanced nervously back toward where Vanessa and her father were still talking, clearly worried that they might notice us. "I don't understand. How did you even know about this event?" "Your company's website. They're very thorough about listing their community engagement activities." Tyler's jaw tightened. "You can't be here. This is a professional event, and I'm trying to make important connections tonight." "I see. And I would interfere with that somehow?" "It's not that," he said quickly, then seemed to realize how that sounded. "It's just that this isn't the right setting for family visits. These people don't know about my background, and bringing up personal history would be inappropriate in this context." I studied his face, seeing the panic behind his attempt at reasonable explanation. "What exactly is inappropriate about your personal history, Tyler?" He looked around again, clearly desperate to end this conversation. "Look, can we talk about this later? Maybe we could have lunch sometime next week, catch up properly." "Lunch sometime next week," I repeated. "Like you promised the last time we talked?" His face flushed. "I've been busy with the new job. There's been a lot to learn. A lot of adjustment." "I'm sure there has been. Adjusting to a new family must be particularly challenging." "What's that supposed to mean?" Before I could answer, Vanessa appeared at Tyler's side, sliding her arm through his with practiced ease. She was even more beautiful in person than she had been from a distance at graduation, with the kind of polished perfection that spoke of lifetime access to the best of everything. "Tyler," she said, her voice carrying the subtle authority of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. "Daddy's been looking for you. He wants to introduce you to the Morrison Group partners." She turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Vanessa Kendall." Tyler looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Vanessa, this is my grandmother, Eleanor Vasquez. Your grandmother? Vanessa's surprise seemed genuine. I had no idea you had family in the Chicago area. I don't, Tyler said quickly. She lives in Rockford. I'm not sure why she's here tonight. The dismissiveness in his tone was like a physical blow. Not sure why I was here, as if my presence in his life required special justification, as if showing up to see my grandson was some kind of inexplicable behavior. I wanted to see where Tyler works, I said calmly. I'm very proud of his success. Vanessa's smile became more genuine. Oh, how sweet. Tyler's been such a wonderful addition to Daddy's firm. He has such a bright future ahead of him. Yes, I agreed. He's always been exceptional. Even as a child after his mother died and he came to live with me, he showed remarkable resilience and determination. I watched Tyler's face as I spoke, seeing him flinch at the mention of his mother's death, at the reminder that he had once needed me, that his current success had roots in a very different kind of life than the one he was now living. Vanessa's expression shifted slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her features. I thought Tyler grew up with his godparents after his parents died. The lie hung in the air between us like a physical presence. Tyler's face went white, and I felt something cold and final settle in my chest. He hadn't just minimized my role in his life. He had erased me completely, replacing me with fictional godparents who presumably fit better with the narrative he wanted to tell about his background. No, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the fury building inside me. Tyler lived with me for 15 years after his mother was killed in a car accident and his father disappeared. I raised him, put him through school, worked double shifts at the textile factory to pay for his college applications and SAT prep courses. Tyler grabbed my arm again, harder this time. Grandma, please. But I wasn't finished. 15 years of sacrifice, 15 years of love and dedication, 15 years of putting Tyler's needs before my own, and he had reduced it all to a lie about godparents who had never existed. I sold my house to afford his college tuition. I continued, looking directly at Vanessa. Liquidated my retirement savings. Worked until I was 70 years old to make sure he could attend Northwestern without taking on debt. Vanessa was staring at Tyler now, her confusion evident. Tyler, what is she talking about? You told me your godparents helped with college costs. It's complicated, Tyler said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's not complicated at all, I said. Tyler is my grandson. I raised him after his parents were gone. I sacrificed everything I had to give him the opportunities that led to this job, this life, this relationship with your family. A small crowd had gathered around us, drawn by the tension in our voices and Tyler's obvious distress. I recognized some faces from the company website, young professionals who worked with Tyler, who were now learning that everything they thought they knew about his background was false. Mr. Kendall appeared at Vanessa's shoulder, his expression shifting from social pleasantness to sharp attention as he took in the scene. Is everything all right here? Daddy, Vanessa said, her voice uncertain, this is Tyler's grandmother. She's been telling me about Tyler's childhood. Mr. Kendall's eyes moved between Tyler and me, clearly trying to assess the situation. I see. Tyler, you didn't mention you had family in the area. She's not, Tyler said desperately. I mean, she is, but she lives in Rockford. She just showed up here tonight. I came to see where my grandson works, I said, addressing Mr. Kendall directly. I wanted to meet the people who are helping him build his career. Your grandson, Mr. Kendall repeated, his tone carefully neutral. Tyler told us he was raised by family friends after his parents passed away. The public nature of Tyler's lie seemed to hit him all at once. His face crumpled slightly, and for a moment, he looked like the lost little boy who had come to live with me 15 years ago. But then his expression hardened, and I saw him make a choice, that broke my heart. All over again. "Look," he said, his voice gaining strength. "This is a misunderstanding. My grandmother gets confused sometimes about our relationship. She helped out when I was younger, but she wasn't really responsible for raising me." The betrayal was complete. Now. Not only had Tyler erased me from his success story, but he was now publicly diminishing my role in his life, making me sound like a peripheral figure who had gotten delusions of grandeur about her own importance. But he had underestimated me. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, gathering evidence, building a case for my place in his life. I wasn't going to be dismissed as a confused old woman. "I have documentation," I said calmly, reaching into my purse. "Financial records showing the tuition payments I made to Northwestern. Photos from your high school graduation, where you gave a speech thanking me for sacrificing everything to help you succeed. Letters of recommendation from your teachers and coaches, all of whom remember very clearly who raised you and supported your education." Tyler's face went from white to gray. "You're embarrassing yourself." "No, Tyler, I'm telling the truth. The question is, are you prepared to keep lying to these people about who you are and where you came from?" The silence that followed was deafening. Everyone in our immediate vicinity had stopped their own conversations and was watching our confrontation with the fascinated horror that people reserved for public family meltdowns. Vanessa was staring at Tyler with an expression I couldn't quite read. Confusion, certainly, but also something that might have been disappointment. "Tyler," she said softly, "is what she's saying true?" Tyler looked around at all the faces, watching him, at the career he was building, at the life he had constructed on a foundation of lies about his past. I could see him calculating the cost of different responses, trying to figure out how to minimize the damage to his carefully crafted image. "It's complicated," he said finally, which was as close to an admission as anyone was likely to get from him. "It's not complicated," I said again. "You're my grandson. I raised you. I loved you. I sacrificed everything I had to give you the opportunities you're enjoying right now. And you repaid me by pretending I don't exist." I looked around at the crowd that had gathered, at Tyler's colleagues and his girlfriend's family, at all the people who were now seeing him clearly for the first time. "I'm 73 years old," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the quiet restaurant. "I worked in a textile factory for 40 years, raised my daughter as a single mother, then raised her son after she died. I'm not ashamed of who I am or where I come from. But apparently, Tyler is." I turned back to Tyler, who was standing frozen, in the middle of the circle that had formed around us. "I came here tonight to remind you who you are," I said. "But I can see that the person I raised, the person who used to be proud of our family, doesn't exist anymore. So I'll leave you to your new life, Tyler. I hope it brings you the happiness you think it will." I started to walk away, but Tyler grabbed my arm one more time. "Wait," he said, his voice cracking. "Grandma, please don't do this." I looked at his hand on my arm, then at his face. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the boy I had raised, the young man who had once called me his hero. But it was too late for that boy to save the man he had become. "Don't do what, Tyler? Tell the truth about our family? Remind people that your success didn't happen in a vacuum? Force you to acknowledge that the woman who raised you deserves better than being written out of your story?" He didn't have an answer for that. How could he? We both knew that everything I was saying was true, and we both knew that he had made a deliberate choice to erase me from his life. I pulled my arm free from his grip and walked toward the restaurant's exit, aware that every person in that room was watching me go. It wasn't the dramatic confrontation I had initially imagined, but it was something more important. It was the truth, spoken clearly and without apology, in front of all the people Tyler was trying to impress. As I waited for the valet to bring my car around, I could hear the buzz of conversation starting up again behind me. People were talking about what they had just witnessed, trying to process the revelation that Tyler's entire background story had been fabricated. I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty, exhausted by the effort it had taken to stand up for myself, drained by the final confirmation that Tyler really was lost to me. But I also felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Relief. I had told the truth. I had refused to be erased. I had reminded Tyler and everyone around him that his success had a history, and that history included me. The drive home to Rockford gave me time to think about what would happen next. Tyler would probably try to manage the damage, spin the story in a way that minimized the impact on his career and his relationship with Vanessa's family. He might even call me, attempt some kind of reconciliation that would allow him to save face. But I was done with Tyler's attempts to manage me. I was done being his embarrassing secret, his inconvenient reminder of a past he wanted to forget. I had spent 15 years raising him to be better than this, and if he had chosen to forget those lessons, that was his decision to live with. When I got home, Mrs. Chen was waiting in the lobby of our building, clearly having been watching for my return. "Well?" she asked, studying my face. "How did it go?" "I told the truth," I said simply. She smiled. "Good. It's about time." That night, I slept better than I had in months. I had done what I needed to do. I had stood up for myself and for the 15 years I had spent loving and supporting Tyler. Whether or not it changed anything, between us, I had reclaimed my dignity and my place in his story. The consequences would unfold in their own time, but for now, it was enough to know that I had finally stopped being invisible. The morning after the networking event, I woke to 17 missed calls on my phone. 13 were from Tyler, 3 from numbers I didn't recognize, and 1 from Jessica, Tyler's college friend who had visited me months earlier. I made my coffee and sat at my kitchen table, listening to the voicemails in chronological order while watching the sunrise through my window. Tyler's first message, left at 11:30 the night before, was desperate and angry. "Grandma, you can't just show up at my work events and embarrass me like that. We need to talk about this. Call me back immediately." His voice was shaky, and I could hear traffic in the background, suggesting he had called from his car while leaving the restaurant. The second call, an hour later, was more pleading. "Please, Grandma Eleanor, I know you're upset, but what you did tonight could ruin everything I've worked for. Vanessa's family is asking questions I don't know how to answer. Just call me back so we can figure this out." By the 5th message, left at 2 in the morning, Tyler sounded exhausted and defeated. "I don't know what you want from me. I can't change the past, and I can't change the fact that my life is different now. But you're my grandmother, and I love you, even if I haven't been good at showing it. Please call me." The calls from unknown. Numbers turned out to be from colleagues at Tyler's firm, people who had witnessed our confrontation and were calling to check on me. One was from a young woman named Rachel who introduced herself as someone who worked in Tyler's department. "Mrs. Vasquez," her message began, "I was at the networking event last night, and I wanted you to know that what you did was incredibly brave. Tyler has been telling everyone that he grew up privileged, that his family had money and connections. Some of us suspected he wasn't being truthful, but we didn't know the real story. You should be proud of what you accomplished with Tyler, even if he's forgotten how to be proud of it himself." Jessica's message was the longest and most thoughtful. "Eleanor, I heard about what happened last night through mutual friends. I want you to know that you did the right thing. Tyler needed to be reminded of who he is and where he came from, even if it was painful for him to hear. I also wanted to let you know that his behavior at the event is being talked about throughout the Northwestern alumni network. People are wondering how someone could be so ashamed of the person who sacrificed everything for their success. You've started a conversation that needed to happen." I deleted Tyler's messages without calling him back. I wasn't ready to deal with his panic or his attempts to minimize what had happened. Instead, I called Jessica, who answered on the first ring. "Eleanor, I'm so glad you called. Are you okay? I heard it was quite a scene last night." "I'm fine," I said, surprised to realize it was true. "Better than I've been in months, actually." "Good. You should feel good about what you did. Tyler needed a reality check, and apparently you were the only person willing to give him one." Jessica went on to explain that news of the confrontation had spread quickly through social media and professional networks. Several people who had known Tyler at Northwestern were sharing their own stories about how he had talked about me during college, comparing those stories to the lies he had apparently been telling about his background in his professional life. "The thing is," Jessica said, "Tyler built his entire post-college identity on pretending to be someone he wasn't, but pretending has consequences, especially when the truth is as compelling as your story. People are more impressed by what you accomplished than they are by the fictional background Tyler created." Over the next few days, I began to understand the full scope of what my confrontation had set in motion. Tyler's lies about his background had created a web of deception that was now unraveling in very public ways. Vanessa, according to Jessica's sources, was questioning everything Tyler had told her about his family and his past. Her parents, who had offered Tyler a position based partly on what they believed about his background and character, were reconsidering their assessment of his integrity. More significantly, Tyler's colleagues at the investment firm were beginning to question other aspects of his presentation of himself. If he had lied about something as fundamental as who had raised him, what else might he be lying about? In IT, a profession where trust and credibility were essential, Tyler's deception was potentially career-ending. I received a call on Thursday morning from someone I hadn't expected to hear from, Mr. Kendall, Vanessa's father, and Tyler's employer. His voice was formal, but not unkind as he introduced himself and asked if he could speak with me about Tyler. "Mrs. Vasquez," he said, "I hope you don't mind my calling you directly. I wanted to apologize for the confusion at the networking event and to thank you for clarifying Tyler's background for us." "There's no need to apologize, Mr. Kendall. I understand that Tyler misrepresented his situation to you." "He did indeed, and while I'm disappointed in his dishonesty, I'm also deeply impressed by what you accomplished in raising him. The story you told about working multiple jobs and sacrificing your retirement to fund his education is remarkable. It speaks to a kind of character and determination that we value highly at our firm." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. "Thank you. I'm calling because I wanted you to know that Tyler's employment with us isn't in jeopardy because of his background. We don't care where someone comes from. We care about their character and their potential. But Tyler's decision to lie about his past raises serious questions about his judgment and integrity." Mr. Kendall paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "I've spoken with Tyler several times since Monday night, and it's clear that he's struggling with how to handle this situation. He seems genuinely remorseful about how he's treated you, but he's also panicked about the potential impact on his career and his relationship with my daughter. What is he planning to do?" "That's partly why I'm calling. Tyler has asked me to arrange a meeting with you, a chance for him to apologize properly and try to make amends. He's concerned that you won't take his calls, and frankly, after what I witnessed the other night, I can understand why." I considered this. Part of me wanted to refuse, to let Tyler stew in the consequences of his choices without offering him any opportunity for redemption. But another part of me, the part that had loved him for 15 years, was curious about what he might have to say. Where would this meeting take place? That would be entirely up to you. Tyler suggested a restaurant, but I thought you might prefer somewhere more private. You're welcome to use our offices if you'd like neutral territory. I'll think about it. Of course, take all the time you need. And Mrs. Vasquez, for what it's worth, I think Tyler is lucky to have someone like you in his life. even if he hasn't been wise enough to appreciate it. After I hung up, I found myself thinking about what Tyler might want to say to me. Was he genuinely remorseful? Or was this just another attempt to manage the damage to his reputation? Was he finally ready to acknowledge what I had meant to his success? Or was he just looking for a way to smooth things over so he could continue his new life without the complication of our confrontation? I decided to accept the meeting, but on my terms. I called Mr. Kendall back and told him that Tyler could come to my apartment on Saturday afternoon. If he wanted to apologize to me, he could do it in the place where I had raised him, surrounded by the evidence of the 15 years we had spent together. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that matched my mood as I prepared for Tyler's visit. I cleaned my apartment more thoroughly than I had in months, not because I wanted to impress him, but because I wanted to remind myself of the life I had built, the space that had been his home for most of his childhood and teenage years. I arranged photo albums on my coffee table, pictures that chronicled Tyler's growth from the 8-year-old who had come to live with me to the young man who had graduated from Northwestern. I also laid out some of the documentation I had gathered for his award nomination: financial records, report cards, letters from teachers. I wanted Tyler to see the evidence of my investment in his life, the tangible proof of what he was trying to erase. He arrived exactly on time, looking more nervous than I had seen him since he was a teenager about to take the SATs. He was dressed casually in jeans and a sweater I remembered buying him for Christmas 2 years ago, and he carried a bouquet of flowers that looked expensive and carefully chosen. "Grandma Eleanor," he said when I opened the door, his voice uncertain. "Thank you for agreeing to see me." I let him in without responding, watching as he looked around the apartment that had been his home for so many years. His eyes lingered on the photos covering my refrigerator, the diploma hanging on the wall, the bookshelf filled with novels I had read to him when he was younger. "It looks exactly the same," he said softly. "Why would it look different? This is my home." He nodded, setting the flowers on my kitchen counter before following me into the living room. When he saw the photo albums and documents spread across the coffee table, his face crumpled slightly. "Grandma, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry for lying about my background. I'm sorry for not inviting you to my graduation party. I'm sorry for making you feel like you didn't matter. You do matter. You matter more than anyone." I sat down across from him, studying his face. He looked genuinely distressed, but I had seen Tyler perform before. He had always been good at saying what people wanted to hear when he was in trouble. "Why did you do it, Tyler? Why did you decide that I was something to be ashamed of?" He was quiet for a long time, staring at his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Because I was afraid." Afraid of what? Afraid that if people knew the truth about my background, they wouldn't take me seriously. Afraid that if they knew I grew up poor, that my grandmother worked in a factory, that I came from nothing, they would see me as different, as less than. I felt anger flare in my chest. Less than what? Less than people who inherited their opportunities instead of earning them. Less than people who never had to work for anything they achieved. "I know it's wrong," Tyler said quickly. "I know that what you did for me, the sacrifices you made, they're more impressive than anything Vanessa's family ever accomplished. But I wanted to fit in. I wanted to belong in their world, and I thought the truth about my past would make that impossible. So you decided to invent new parents, godparents who never existed." Tyler winced. It started small, just letting. People assume things instead of correcting them. But once I started lying, it became harder and harder to tell the truth. And then I met Vanessa, and her family was so impressed by what they thought they knew about my background, and I was terrified of losing that. What about losing me? Were you worried about that? The question hung in the air between us. Tyler looked up at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. "I thought you would always be there," he said. "I thought you would always love me no matter what I did, so I took you for granted. I thought I could have both things. Your unconditional love and support, and my new life with Vanessa's family. I didn't realize that treating you badly would eventually mean losing you. You haven't lost me, Tyler, but you've lost the version of me that would accept being treated as disposable." He nodded, wiping his eyes. "I know, and I don't expect you to forgive me, at least not right away. But I want to try to make things right. I want to tell people the truth about who you are and what you did for me." "Is that what Mr. Kendall suggested you should do?" Tyler looked surprised. "No, actually. He said that trying to manage this situation for the sake of my career would be the wrong approach. He said that if I really wanted to make amends, I needed to stop thinking about what would be best for me and start thinking about what would be right." And that sounded like something Mr. Kendall would say, based on our phone conversation. "And what do you think would be right?" "I think I should start by nominating you for recognition at Northwestern's alumni events. I think I should write an article for the alumni magazine about what you sacrificed to make my education possible. I think I should make sure that everyone who knows about my success also knows about your role in making it happen." I was quiet for a moment, considering his proposal. It sounded good, but I had learned not to trust Tyler's promises without seeing action behind them. And what about Vanessa? What about her family? Tyler's face darkened. "Vanessa and I are taking a break. She said she needs time to process everything she learned about me. And honestly, I think she's right. I've been so focused on becoming the person I thought she wanted me to be that I lost track of who I actually am." "And who are you, Tyler?" He looked around the room again, taking in the photos and mementos of his childhood. "I'm the kid whose mother died when he was 8. I'm the grandson of a woman who worked in a textile factory for 40 years and never complained about it. I'm someone who got opportunities because someone else sacrificed everything to give them to me. I'm someone who should be proud of where I came from instead of ashamed of it." For the first time since he had arrived, Tyler sounded like the young man I had raised. Not the polished professional he had become, not the social climber who had been trying to erase his past, but the boy who had once told me I was his hero. "It's going to be difficult," I warned him. "Telling the truth after you've been lying for so long. Some people won't trust you again. Some relationships might not survive." "I know, but living with lies is harder than dealing with the truth. These past few months, trying to keep all my stories straight, constantly worrying about being found out, it's been exhausting. And pushing you away, treating you like you were something to be embarrassed about, it's been the worst part of all." Tyler leaned forward, his expression earnest. "I don't expect things to go back to the way they were. I know I've damaged our relationship, and I know it will take time to rebuild trust. But I want to try. I want to be someone you can be proud of again. I was always proud of you, Tyler. I was proud of your academic achievements, proud of your work ethic, proud of the kind young man you had become. What I wasn't proud of was your decision to forget where you came from and who had helped you get there. I know, and I want to change that. I want to be proud of our family, proud of what you accomplished, proud of the story of how I really got to where I am." We talked for another hour, making tentative plans for how Tyler might begin to repair the damage he had done. He would start by reaching out to his Northwestern classmates, correcting the false stories he had told about his background. He would write a detailed account of my role in his success for the alumni magazine. He would make sure that any future professional or social introductions included accurate information about his family. Most importantly, he would stop trying to be someone he wasn't. The polished, privileged young professional he had been performing was a character, not a person. The real Tyler was more complicated, more interesting, and more worthy of respect than the fiction he had created. When he was getting ready to leave, Tyler paused at the door. "Grandma Eleanor, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How did you know to come to that networking event? How did you know exactly what to say to make me realize what I had been doing?" I smiled. "I learned from a wise neighbor that sometimes people need to be reminded of who they are, even if it's uncomfortable for everyone involved. And I learned from 15 years of raising you that you're stronger and better than you sometimes choose to be." "Will you be able to forgive me?" "I already have, Tyler. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened, and it doesn't mean going back to the way things were. But it means that I'm willing to see who you choose to be going forward, not just who you've been." After Tyler left, I called Mrs. Chen to update her on how the conversation had gone. She listened without interrupting, then pronounced her verdict, with characteristic directness. "Good. He needed to be humbled before he could grow up. The question now is whether he'll follow through on his promises or just say what you want to hear." "We'll see," I said. "But for the first time in months, I feel like I'm talking to my grandson instead of a stranger who happens to share his name." Over the following weeks, Tyler began the difficult work of rebuilding his reputation and his relationships. He published a heartfelt article in the Northwestern Alumni magazine titled "The Real Story of My Success," which detailed my sacrifices and my role in his education. The article was widely shared and commented on, with many readers expressing admiration for what I had accomplished and disappointment in Tyler's initial attempts to hide his background. Tyler also reached out individually to his Northwestern classmates, many of whom had heard about the networking event confrontation through mutual friends. Some were forgiving, understanding that the pressure to fit in after college could lead to poor decisions. Others were less sympathetic, particularly those who had shared their own family stories with Tyler based on what they thought was reciprocal honesty. The situation with Vanessa remained complicated. She had agreed to continue their relationship, but on new terms that included meeting me properly and learning the real story of Tyler's background. When they came to visit me together a month after our confrontation, I could see that their dynamic had shifted. Vanessa was more serious, more thoughtful, asking questions about Tyler's childhood and our family history that showed genuine interest, rather than polite curiosity. "I'm sorry I didn't get to know you sooner," she told me during that visit. "Tyler's been telling me about your book club and your volunteer work at the food bank. I'd love to visit again sometime. Maybe help with your volunteering if you think they could use an extra hand." I appreciated her effort, though I could see that she was still processing the gap between the Tyler she had thought she knew and the Tyler who was emerging from his web of deceptions. Their relationship might survive, or it might not, but at least it was now based on truth rather than fiction. Mr. Kendall proved to be as understanding as he had seemed during our phone conversation. Tyler's employment at the investment firm continued, though his path forward would clearly be shaped by how well he rebuilt trust with his colleagues and clients. In some ways, Tyler's real background proved to be more compelling to potential clients than his fictional one had been. A young man who had overcome genuine adversity and succeeded through hard work and family sacrifice was more interesting than someone who had simply inherited advantages. 6 months after the networking event, Tyler called to tell me about a decision he had made. "I've been thinking about Mom," he said, "about what she would think of the person I became and what she would want me to do going forward." "What conclusion did you reach?" "I think she would be disappointed in how I treated you, but proud that I'm trying to make things right. And I think she would want me to make sure her story gets told too, not just mine." Tyler had decided to establish a scholarship fund at Northwestern in Maria's name, funded partly by his salary from the investment firm and partly by donations from family friends and former teachers who remembered my daughter. The scholarship would be awarded annually to a student who had overcome significant personal loss and was being supported by a family member making financial sacrifices for their education. "I want the scholarship description to tell Mom's story and your story," Tyler explained. I want people to understand that success isn't just about individual achievement. It's about families and communities that invest in each other. The scholarship fund became Tyler's way of honoring both his mother's memory and my sacrifices, while also helping other families in similar situations. At the first annual scholarship award ceremony, Tyler gave a speech that told the complete story of his background, including details about Maria's death, my decision to raise him, and the years of financial struggle that had preceded his academic success. I attended that ceremony, sitting in the front row where I belonged, watching Tyler present the scholarship to a young woman whose grandmother had mortgaged her house to pay for college tuition. The parallels to our own story were clear, and I could see that Tyler understood those parallels in a way he hadn't before our confrontation. After the ceremony, Tyler found me in the crowd of families and donors. "How did I do?" he asked, the question carrying echoes of every school performance and basketball game where he had sought my approval. "You did well," I said. "Your mother would be proud." "What about you? Are you proud?" I looked at him, seeing not just the successful young professional he had become, but also the scared little boy who had needed me 15 years ago, and the young man who was finally learning to value the right things. "I've always been proud of you, Tyler. But today, for the first time in a long time, I think you're proud of yourself for the right reasons." The journey from that devastating graduation day to this moment of genuine reconciliation had been painful for both of us. Tyler had learned that success built on lies and shame was ultimately hollow, while I had learned that standing up for myself was sometimes the most loving thing I could do for someone I cared about. We still had work to do. Trust, once broken, takes time to rebuild. But we were both committed to building something new together, a relationship based on honesty and mutual respect, rather than obligation and resentment. As I watched Tyler interact with the scholarship recipient and her family, answering their questions about college and offering encouragement about their challenges, I realized that he had finally learned the lesson I had been trying to teach him all along, that where you come from matters not because it defines your limitations, but because it defines your values. The boy who had once been ashamed of his factory worker grandmother had become a man who understood that love and sacrifice are more valuable than inherited privilege, that character is built through struggle rather than comfort, and that the people who lift you up deserve to be celebrated, not hidden. It wasn't the ending I had imagined when I stood up at that networking event and refused to be erased from Tyler's story. But it was better than what I had hoped for. It was real, honest, and built to last. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.